Welcome back to this is the fifth of 6 lessons for the wall cabinet class. Tonight we're going to talk about hanging the door on knife hinges. And next class we will do fitting a drawer, and I'll cover some things about making the back and making the pulls as well. And that will get us through the entire cabinet from beginning to end. As you can see, my cabinet has the liner is glued in, and I've already routed mortises for the hinges. And that's something with a knife hinge. You need to route the mortises in the case before you assemble it, glue it together, whatever, because you can't do it afterwards. You can't really do them by hand with, let's say, a chisel, because they're so close to the edge of the cabinet that you can't really even get a chisel in there and hold it well. All right. I will say this, that I have been taking some medication recently, and today is not a good day for medication, so it's made me kind of really flat, but I will get through this. So if I seem like I'm quite laconic, that's why. It's not because I'm bored or disinterested. It's just the way that the medication has made me feel today. Anyways, so let's talk a little bit about the cabinet and what I've done since the last time. Then we'll talk about the door and how I made it. And then I will show you how I do a hinge mortise for a knife hinge. All right, so last time I was making and fitting all the liners and the divider parts, and I finished that up, and then I painted, and I used a custom color of green milk paint, which is 1 part bayberry green and 1 part buttermilk. And so you could mix if you want to use the same color as me. I do kind of wish that I didn't have any oyster white or enough to do this, so that was my first choice. But I do like the way the green turned out. Of course, you can use any color you want to. Some of the things that became... Oh, like that's a little bit of an issue. Like, one thing that happened is that this shelf cupped, and in the middle here, the cup it wasn't going to get taken out by here, and there's no cup over here because it's in the dado, but it could still be cupped here in the middle. And at least earlier today, it was cupped bad enough that I was trying to... Yeah, it's still cupped pretty bad. Like, I have to figure out how to get it to stay down. So this divider's not been glued in yet. This has, so I'm going to have to figure that out, and I will. Anyways, when you are fitting your divider, you want to make sure that this is square or straight up and down, because that'll make the door a lot easier to make if it is. All right, so when you're fitting this for length, you want to make sure that you're not bowing this out or bowing it in. All right. Then when it came time to do the mortise and the lower and the bottom and top liner pieces, what I did was dry assembled the liners. I clamped this side piece very tightly to the case itself, so as if it were glued in. And then I put my mortise, I laid out where the knife hinge was going to go, and I mortised for that. I will say, so let me show you this. Just like with butt hinges, right? Like when you close a butt hinge and there's a door on it, it naturally creates a gap between the door and the cabinet. And a knife hinge has the same thing. It's just that it's horizontal rather than vertical. And on like a Brusso knife hinge, there's a washer that is on the post, and that is what, it's the thickness of that washer that determines the gap between the door and the cabinet. Now with a butt hinge, that gap is always either on one of the two vertical sides. But with a knife hinge, that gap is top to bottom. And that becomes really critical when you're fitting the door. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you need to locate, ideally the gap on all four sides of the door is identical. So you need to know the gap between the two leaves of the hinge so that you can figure out what the gap on the hinge side should be. Say like a Brusso, that is a little tricky because it has that washer, but the washer doesn't come off. On the hinges that I use, I give you a link to them on the same page that has like the drawings and stuff. All right, so they're from Sanderson Hinges, and they come as, you get 2 hinge leaves, and then you get a pair of hinges, so that's 4 hinge leaves. But you can see there's the little post, and it comes with washers that can either be on or off. You can take them off, is what I mean to say. And so what I normally do to locate where the hinge is going to be is I put the washer up against the cabinet side, or in this case the liner side, and then I press my hinge up against it, and that determines how far the hinge is away from the cabinet side or the liner side. All right, if you have a hinge that the washer does not come off, you need to either stack business cards or find something that's the same thickness as that little washer in between the 2 hinge leaves. All right. So what I did, and we'll see this when I actually mortised the door, is I put my hinge leaf on two-sided tape, double stick tape. I cut the tape out around it, and then I double stick tape my hinge to the part and then cut around it with a marking knife. Then once I pull the hinge off, I have like a cut outline of the hinge leaf, and I can then route out the waste and clean it up with a chisel. And that's what we're going to do tonight on the door. So we're not going to see it. I had to do it before class because I had to glue this up and have it assembled so that I could start making and fitting the door. All right. Well, one thing that's really critical about a knife hinge is, like a butt hinge, in a sense, normally half the barrel is outside the door, so that when it opens, it has some clearance to get around the cabinet side. And I'm using what's called an offset knife hinge because the doors are inside the cabinet. So having that little leg, it's shaped like an L, and the post is on the short leg. Because the post is there, when the door swings open, it actually is swinging open out past the front of the cabinet. Now, with the liner here, and the liner being inset from the front of the cabinet, what I actually did was push the hinge a little bit farther forward than I normally would so that there's more clearance to get around, try to get around the cabinet. I'm not 100% sure it's going to work out, but even if it doesn't, it's still going to open up really far. All right. It's not going to open up 180 degrees, but it doesn't really need to anyways. All right. So, but what is important is that when you mortise in the door, that you locate the hinge leaf in the same plane, vertical plane, that you did the hinge leaves in the cabinet. And that's important because the hinge leaves come apart. It's not like a butt hinge where it's always together. They come apart, and if you don't get them in the same vertical plane, the door could be angled in a little bit, it could be angled out, and then that's going to affect how it opens. All right? So knife hinges are more challenging than a butt hinge, but they also look nicer, and they look better, I think, on contemporary furniture. All right, so let's talk about the door then. Okay, there's a question. Let's answer. There's a few. Let's answer those.
Peter says, I got a Brusso hinge a bit bigger than your hinge. Does that matter?
No, the size of it doesn't matter. What you do need to be concerned about is the thickness of the door. So you need to measure how much, like the distance from the the outside of the hinge leaf to the middle of the barrel. And your door has to be at least that thick, plus like 1/8 of an inch. All right. So these are really small hinges, and the distance from the back of the hinge to the middle of the barrel is something we need to know. So let me find my. It's about 3/8 of an inch. And so my door is easily going to be around 5/8 of an inch, so that's not a problem. I could have gone with a slightly larger hinge maybe. But so that's one thing if you are going to use, you have to know before you make your door. And that's true with butt hinges too, though. I mean, the leaves are a certain width, and your door frame has to be at least that thick, if not a little bit thick. It should be a little bit thicker. All right, what were the other questions?
Next question is, how did you glue in the liner? Did you spread glue on the liner and push in from the back of the case, says Dave.
I made my liner to fit from the front, so it slid in from the front. But what I did was glue each piece of the liner in one at a time. If you recall last time we were together, I said that I was going to make big plywood cauls that are essentially just slightly wider, not quite as long as the liner parts. And then I used those to clamp the liners in to ensure that it was completely flat when it got glued down, that there wasn't like a cup or a bow in it or anything like that. And I just did that for each of the 4 liner parts as I glued them in one at a time.
When you fit in the liner pieces, the fit was tight. Do you always aim for that same fit, or would you want a looser fit when working in lower humidity?
Well, the length of a board is not really affected by changes in humidity. Boards, the amount that a board will expand and contract in its length is so small that you don't have to compensate for it. All right, so no, you can have it fit just right any time of the year. All right, and it should still be okay. So I've not noticed that ever. I've never ever noticed that's a problem. Anything else? Gosh, I'm sorry. I do apologize. It's really not me.
No, that's it.
Okay. So let's talk about the door some. So the door, because you could have made a frame and panel door, you could still use knife hinges, I guess, with a frame and panel door. Although that's a little weird because normally the rails go all the way to the top and bottom, in which case you'd be mortising into ingrain, and that would not be smart. So you'd probably have to do a different style frame and panel door where the rails, in a sense, were the top and bottom, and then the stiles were the 2 vertical sides, and that might look a little weird, but whatever. Anyways, so my door is a solid plank, and instead of using solid wood for that, which would not be very stable, and you'd also run into the problem of needing to mortise into ingrain, I made a door that has a piece of plywood at the center. Then there's edge banding around the edges of the plywood. And then there's shopsawn veneer on the front and back faces. So the order in which I did that, so I made the 2, 3, 4. All right. You started with a piece of 1/2-inch Baltic birch ply, and I cut it so that it would fit snugly into the opening. And then, because I was going to use 1/8-inch thick edge banding, I cut it a quarter inch shorter and a 1/4 inch narrower than it was when it fit in perfectly. And then I glued on the top and bottom edge banding first. And when that was on, I fit the height of the door, because it's much easier to do then than it is after you get everything glued up. And that's partly because it has edge banding on it. But also, what I would worry about it is that I'd have to remove too much material after I glued it all up and had the veneer on it, that my edge banding might end up being really thin, and I don't want that. So if I had to go too far, I could always cut it off and add on another piece. So once I had the top and bottom edge banding on, I used the washers. I put 2 down at the bottom and sat the door in there and worked them until I could get the 2 washers in at the top and 2 washers in at the bottom. Not in thickness, but just one here and one here, so that the door is sitting on 2 washers and it's stable. I ended up leaving the door maybe 2 or 3 hand plane passes too long, top to bottom, so that if there were a really bad squeeze out, I could clean it up and not affect the door's fit. After I got the top and bottom edge banding on, I then glued on the side pieces, and normally I would have done a little bit of fitting there. I would have hand planed them down some, but I was crunched for time, so what I did was just go ahead and glued the front veneer onto the door. And I've not glued the back veneer on because it doesn't matter for fitting a knife hinge, because all the fitting, at least when I do it, the front edge is used as your reference. So I'm not worried about the back having no veneer yet. I'll do the veneer tomorrow, But let me show you how I made the veneer really quickly. So I took another piece, the rest of a piece of what's this stuff called? Western hemlock, and I cut it to like 24 inches, which you can see is a lot longer than the door. That's fine. And I just ripped from the edge. I just ripped off pieces that are a little over 1/8 of an inch thick, and then I laid them down in what's called a slip match. Oops. And so in between each cut at the bandsaw, I rejointed the edge. So on the bottom of all these pieces is a jointed face. And all the top here is all a bandsawn face. And I just edge glued this together. I can show you the technique for that. Although Philip Morley wrote an article for Fine Woodworking a long time ago, I was the editor for that article, where basically he shows you how he does it, and I stole it from him. I lay all my pieces down like this and press them against my table saw's rip fence after locking it down, and I just really tightly do blue tape across it, and then blue tape along the seams, and that's actually going to make it curl up. And I turn it over, put glue in all the joints, and then stretch blue tape across it on the other side, and that will actually flatten it back out. And then, let it dry for about an hour or 2 hours, and then you can take the tape off. That's how I do really thin stuff. If there's time tonight, I'll show you how I actually tape it up. But we'll save that for last if there's time. All right, are there any questions?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. Let me think. Let me gather my head thoughts for a minute. All right, so I glued the veneer on. I used a vacuum press. You could also do this with like cauls. You would probably want to make.
Showed that in your book, right?
Did we show it in the
I remember
book?
doing it with you.
We did it in a class.
Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah. Because this is so wide, you might have trouble getting a clamp all the way to the middle. So what I would do is put this between like two pieces of MDF, and then I would use something like a caul like this. I'd cut it shorter, but I would use cauls like this, one at the top, one on the top, and one on the bottom, and that would put pressure on in the middle of the panel. So you make sure you get really nice, even glue bond, tight glue line. All right.
Is the edge banding miter?
No, mitering the edge banding I know looks nice, but it makes everything a pain in the butt, because when you start to fit the door for its width, if you were to take material away from that side, the miter joint would no longer come to a tight point because you would be hand planing it down. So on the top and the bottom edge banding, you would see the end grain, and that would look weird. So what I do instead is run the vertical edge banding from top to bottom. And you can see the end grain at the top and the bottom, but when the door is hung and it's like up, like at this level, you can't see the top edge and you don't see the bottom edge. So the fact that there's end grain visible there doesn't really matter. All right. The veneer was oversized after I took it out of the bag. Normally I would route it flush with my router table, but we were in here setting up, so I just did it with a hand plane and brought it down flush. All right. We can start doing the hinge mortises now. Oh, excuse me. I do feel really bad. It's one of the side effects of this medication is it can make you sleepy. By medication, I mean Quaaludes. Just kidding. I'm not even sure if Quaaludes make you sleepy. How would I know? All right, let me check the height of this door to see if I need to adjust it at all. I know I definitely need to adjust the width of it. But let me test the height here real quick. Yeah, one of the nice things about Sanderson hinges is that not only do they give you 4 washers so that you can adjust the gap size if you want. But what it means for me is that it makes it really easy to test the door's fit, because you can stand it up on 2 washers and then try to slide a washer in from the top. All right, so you see those 2 washers in there? I'm probably going to have to adjust the width of this, but let's see how that fits. Shoot. Of course, you don't want to lose your washers. It's a little. I'm going to take 1 or 2 passes with a hand plane here. Now, you might be asking, well, why are you being so fussy about the height of the door? And that's because we are going to route a mortise or make a mortise, hinge mortise in the top and bottom edge of the door. And if I do that and then hand plane off some to get it to fit right, I've made my mortise shallower, and so I would have to re-mortise, to make it deeper. And you don't want to have to do that. All right, let's see how that is working for me. Yeah, I'm going to leave that. That's good. All right. Gather up all you washers. Alright, set that to the side.
Do you ever put a bevel on the non-hinge side of the door to help it close easier?
Yes. So the question was, do I ever bevel the side that you use to open and close the door? Not the hinge side, but the other side. Yes, I always do that because that's how you get the door to close and not have the gap be too big. So if you were just to adjust the width of the door and keep this edge here square, then in order for it to close, the gap would end up being really big. So if you bevel it, usually like for a front door of a house, I think it's 3 degrees. Is the angle that they use. All right. That might be a little too severe of a bevel, but that's okay. Adjust that a little bit. I do think that was too severe of a bevel. Still. And we go to the hinge side and hope that I can hand plane everything in the same direction. Just starting to get there. Take a little bit more off the hinge side, I think. feels like I'm playing in the wrong direction. Any questions right now, Jim?
Nope.
You like that sound?
It's great.
All right. Well, it's obviously still a little too wide, but that's something. I'm going to take a few more passes off the hinge side, and then it's something that I can adjust once I get the door hung. I want to try to get the door hung. But you have to be careful because I'm definitely going to take some off the hinge side because I know that what I need is there's a gap on the hinge side, but there's also a gap on the other side, and I want to make sure that those are even, and I also want to make sure that I don't have to take off so much after I mortise for the hinges that I remove that entire edge banding. I don't think I would do that, but it's just something to be cautious about. Well, I'm curious as to what this might look like. So I got the door in there. You can see obviously there's a gap, for the top and the bottom. And I really technically need that much gap on this side right now. So I'll probably take a few more passes and you can also see there's a gap down here, but not up here. So once I hang it, I'll be able to, adjust this gap so that it's right, because this gap will be determined by the location of the hinges. So it's only going to be this side that really needs to be finessed to make it a nice even gap. This gap will be nice and even by default, just like the top and the bottom one should be. All right, just take another pass or two, and then we can get to mortising. Whew. It's kind of humid, huh, Joe?
A little bit. But I'm not wearing leather.
Yeah. Questions?
John says, is casein paint the same as milk paint?
Probably. I think it's pronounced casein.
Casein.
Because that's the protein in milk that's used as the binding agent or the binder in milk paint. So I imagine, I've never seen casein paint, but I imagine it's the same thing.
He uses it for picture frames.
Who does?
John said he uses it for picture frames.
Oh, okay.
Nick says, I know you didn't want to be limited to measurements, but what gap are you shooting for on each side of the door?
So the gap is determined by the hinge. Remember how earlier I said when you close a butt hinge and the doors on it and everything, there's a gap that's built into the hinge. And these knife hinges are the same. There's a gap built into or between the leaves of the hinge. In this case, it's determined by the thickness of those washers. So the gap that I'm shooting for is going to be the same as the gap at the top and the bottom, which is determined by the thickness of the washers. So that's how I hang a door. I want the gap to be even around all four sides. The gap is determined by the hinge you use. All right, so I'm not making up a measure, something like, oh, it should be 1/8 or whatever. It's not. It's whatever that gap is between the hinge leaves. That's the gap around the other three sides of the door. All right. Well, let's start mortising, because I think we are sufficiently. I think I'm okay. I think I'm okay. I could take a little bit more off of there. That's what I'm going to do. All right, let me do that real quick. All right, let's give this the old test one more time. All right, I think we're pretty good there. Okay. One thing I totally blanked on, and I wouldn't normally do this, was there's got to be something for the door to stop against. Now, normally what I do is there'll be a shelf in there or something, and it stops against that. Or maybe there's a liner, and it stops against the liner. So I'm going to have to retroactively figure that out. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. But I did realize today that I had not installed, and thought about a stop in any way. So, anyways. All right. We are ready to begin mortising. I'm going to move the cabinet out of the way. I'm going to put this Moxon vise on my workbench. I hope. That was the plan. I'll clamp it. What I have gathered about the leg vise, which I've read and been told many times that the leg vise is absolutely amazing. It's the most wonderful woodworking vise there is. And all you need besides a leg vise, well, you don't really need anything besides a leg vise to do woodworking except for a Moxon vise. Because leg vises suck for certain things. Will you hold this, please? Hey, Joe, would you hold this? I think this will still work. I do. You hold it down tight. All right.
It's my finger.
Is it?
It was.
Leg vices are so amazing that all you need is another vise so that you can use a leg vise. All right. So I'm going to put my door in here. I'm going to clamp it. That's not really level. That's better. All right, one thing I need to know, because I want the front of my door to be, oh my, holy moly. Splinter that was at least a 1/4 inch deep. This stuff is splintery. Oh, look at that. It came from right there. That's why you break the edges. I didn't break those edges yet. I want the front face of my door to be flush with the front edge of my liner and the dividers. In order for that to happen, I have to set the the hinge leaf in from the front of the door the same amount that I set it in from the front of the liner. All right? So what I'm going to do is take my small combo square and I'm going to set it to that location. Okay. Now, I'm going to, okay, this is the front of my door, that's the bottom, this is the top, that's the hinge side. It would be a shame to make a critical error like putting the hinges in the wrong location at this point. I would probably cry.
I would have probably done that.
So, all right, so there's a little cut line there. What I'm going to do now is get my knife hinges. I'm going to get some two-sided tape. All tape has two sides. I'm going to get some double stick tape. I'm going to find my scissors. I see. Going to cut off a little piece of tape. Some tape here. All right, where is a hinge leaf? So on the top, the thing about knife hinges is the leaf that has the post in it always goes on the bottom of the pair, whether that's at the top or the bottom. You know, at the top or the bottom of the door. All right, so here I have, so at the top of the door, the post goes on the door. And, all right, so that was a bad enough splinter that my finger is bleeding now. What time is it? All right, we have 10 more minutes. Let me get this set up, and then we can...
Put stitches.
Then I'll go to the emergency room. My finger's gone. All right, so I'm going to put this hinge on the stickiness, the sticky side. And I'm going to press it on there. I'm not going to cut on top of this vise.
Will wants to know why you use a marking knife for the hinges, but a pencil for your dovetails.
Because that's just how I've always done it. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's just how I've always done it. But also, yeah, that's why. It's probably not a satisfying answer, but.
For a second, I thought you were cutting it out the door.
All right. Let me get the tape off.
All the birds make songs.
All right. So I have my mark. So the short leg of the hinge, this goes flush with the edge of the door. All right. So it's like an open mortise because this leaf is going to slide. The door is going to slide onto it. All right, so this goes there. It's flush there. Let me make sure it's flush there. Alright, I'm going to press it down. Now I'm just going to cut around it. Some two-side double-stick tape it kind of likes to slide around on you a little bit, so you got to be careful if this stuff is kind of moving about on me a little bit. Okay. So now I have knifed out a little mortise, which I guess you probably cannot see.
Negative.
All right, let me put a little bit of pencil in it. Can you see that now? No, not really. Okay. All right, so why don't we do this? Because I do not want to bleed onto my door or anything. So I'm going to go, we'll take let's say we'll come back at 8 o'clock Eastern time. It's a little over 5 minutes from now. And when we come back, I will route this, I'll clean it up with chisels and fit the hinge in there. Okay? All right, so I've put a 1/8 inch spiral bit into my little plunge router. And I'm going to plunge it down until the bit is touching this piece of plywood. It could be anything, really. It could be your table saw, whatever. Now, in order to set the depth of the bit so that it's exactly the right depth, I'm going to take my little, this part of the depth stop, pick it up. I'm going to put a hinge leaf under it and drop it back down. So the hinge leaf is sandwiched between the turret stop and the adjustable part of the stop. And then I'm just going to tighten it. All right. So now the bit will plunge to exactly that depth, and it'll be perfectly deep, the perfect right depth. This router has a bit of a micro adjust on it right here. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll test this in a piece of scrap, and then I'll adjust it until it's perfect. But tonight we're going to live dangerously. All right, let me put all this stuff away so I don't lose it. Let me get my hearing protection. I'm just going to do this freehand, all right? Which might sound a little dangerous to you, but I have found that I can do this freehand without really any trouble. I did clamp a piece of plywood in front of and behind the door. Let's adjust that camera down so they can. So there's a piece of plywood here, then the door, and then another piece of plywood. And that just gives me a wider base to rest the router on. All right. Okay. We ready then? All right. I put this in backwards, but that's all right. All right, so I got pretty close to the line. Not super close, but pretty close. Now I'm just going to take 2 chisels and clean it out real quick. I guess I also like the knife here because it gives you something to register the chisel in, to take your final sort of little nibble to get rid of waste, whereas a pencil would not do that. All right, let's hope that I'm actually as good as I think I am. Okay, it's not. It's a little too short, so I'm just gonna take a little bit off. Okay, that's right. So it's a little too much taken off right here, but that's I know why that happened. It's all right. Okay, so what I would do is push that in tight, use a Vicks bit to drill my holes, and then it would be good to go. All right. Are there any questions about that process?
Nothing yet.
No. All right. So, what time is it? It's just after 8 o'clock, right?
10 after.
All right. All right. I'll do the other side, and I won't explain what I'm doing this time, but I'll do it unless you have questions, and then we can hang the door, sort of. Oh, I forgot to pre-drill for it. That was stupid. Oh well, I can work that out. And then we can finish talking about fitting the door. All right.
How did the mortise end up a little large?
Because against my better judgment while I was doing it, I used a pencil inside the the cut line. I shouldn't have done that, and just
So that they could see it.
Yeah, and the pencil plus it just made it too confusing as to what was what, you know. I need to do this. All right, now I need, that goes with that, so that goes with that. That's so I'm just gonna put this other hinge down on the tape, hinge leaf, and then cut it.
A breeze. Nice. And it says the door hinge leaves in this case don't get seen. It's the lower and upper hinge that has to be spot on, correct?
Ask that question again.
He says the door hinge leaves in this case do not get seen. The part that's in the door.
Correct. The leaves really don't are not seen. All you end up seeing is just this tiny little bit of brass. You know,
In the front.
you just see the little bit of the front there. It's like that's all you see. You know, actually, I bet how it got too wide was the tape moving on me when I was laying it out, which means I can never use this tape again for this purpose. That's okay, because that's not why I have it. All right. I'm going to turn this around. Reset. Well, let's just... I mean, one thing I will point out about freehand routing, I really, almost any time I route, I never hold the router like this. I always hold it down at the base. And you get better control over it that way. All right, let's do this. Now let's clean it up.
Surprised you haven't given the chisel talk yet.
About how to hold a chisel?
You never beat it with a hammer.
Yeah, I never hit my chisels with a mallet or anything. All I ever really do is pair with my chisels. And that's why they stay sharp for so long. Oops, that was stupid. Any questions?
No.
All right. Let's see how this one goes. Oh, let's see. Much better. Still a little too tight, so looks like it's the front that needs to. There's something underneath it. Okay, getting there. I'm sure that this is not exactly the most fun thing to watch, but
It says are there left and right hand hinges?
yes, at least from Sanderson, there are. I don't know if Brusso does the same thing.
He said he thought his were universal.
That's yeah. That might be the case. But for Sanderson, they come in left hand and right hand. Okay. This needs just a little bit sliver more. Problem is, it's going to be hard to fit this because the stuff's not drilled yet. It still just needs to come. I just need to take some off of there. Okay. All right, so that one has been fit in. This will be a little tricky because I can't screw the hinge parts in, or the hinge leads into the cabinet right now, because I have not done those holes yet. But
Nick says, is the fine adjustment... Oh, the fine adjustment is critical to learn. And then Dave asks, what is not drilled yet? There's little screw holes.
Holes for the screws, yeah. All right. Thank you, Joe. All right. This out of the way. Oh, that out of the way. Oh, we gotta have the washers. I promise you, this door is not gonna close. I can assure you of that. Okay. Turn this all around. Well, I can only do it right there. So as I mentioned, the leaves for the door go on in the cabinet. And this is why it gets a little tricky because, all right, so this has got to go there. Then what you do is you take your door and you're supposed to slide it onto the hinges. This one did not. All right. The good news is that the height does look to be really good. It's maybe even just a smidge too short. And I think that I can adjust. I can fix that though. I'll put a little bit of veneer down in there if I need to. We'll see. All right, so it's not closing. So it's definitely too wide. But not too much too wide. Like it's just up here at the top where it's really too wide. All right, so let me take this off the hinges. Move that. All right. So I said it was at the top is where it was really too wide. All right. So I'm going to come over here. Get this completely out of the way. All right, let's see how that works. Oops. Oh, man.
That was a tough one.
That washer almost went right down this opening in the throat plate. Man, that would not have been good. You get a small piece of metal lost inside your saw stop.
It's not magnetic, right?
I don't know if these are magnetic or not. sometimes just it's almost closing. And it's just right here in the middle, which is not surprising because I mostly focused up here and it was already about right there. So it's just right through here that I need to get. Might want to take the hinge out. Let's see if this is straight. Yeah. Okay. Okay, kids. Let's give her one more go. Oh, look, I done messed up my paint down here. Gonna have to do a little surgery on that. It's just a superficial wound. It's still just right here in the middle, but you can see that it is closing now. And see, looking from the back, I can see the light that comes through, and is it a parallel light all the way across, and it looks really good except for that one place in the middle, which is what I would work on next. But that hinge is not. All right. I think for tonight, I'm just going to leave it like this for the sake of the class, but you get the idea, right? Just like now, it's any other door, you're just working to get that last gap the same as the rest of them. It's a little different than, say, a butt hinge door, because with a butt hinge door, you can fit the top, the bottom, and the lock side after hanging the door. And you can't really do that with a knife hinge. You have to fit the top and the bottom, then mortise, and then you make all your adjustments over here, because this side is determined by the location of the hinges, and so you can't really adjust that. You're only left adjusting this. So you really need to make sure that this edge is parallel to the case, and that the height is correct, and that the top and the bottom edges are parallel to the case before you do your mortising. Sorry, so we have a question?
When positioning the hinge for marking out, do you center the post hole, center with TRE, just so you know? Center the post hole on the front of the liner.
So the question was, how is the hinge located relative to the center line of the post, or the barrel, or the knuckles, if you would. And yes, typically you do the center line is on the front edge of the cabinet or the liner in this case. I did say that I snuck mine forward just a tiny little bit so that when the door opens, it will open a little bit further. And so you can see this door is going to open up really far. And it would still open really far even if I hadn't snuck it forward a little bit. But I did sneak it forward a little bit.
And then Nick says, looks great. Please remind me what the thickness of the birch ply was for your door.
I used 1/2 inch. So the question was about the thickness of the plywood for my door. It was 1/2 inch plywood, which is a little bit less than a 1/2 inch, but it was a 1/2 inch ply. Excuse me. Pardon me. And then I use, by the time I get all my veneers on there, the front and the back veneers, it's going to be closer to 5/8 of an inch thick, the door itself. All right. No more questions? All right, so we have about 20 minutes or so. Why don't if there aren't other questions about hanging the door, why don't I show you how I glue up the veneer, and then we can take questions and call it a night. All right?
Sounds good.
Okay. Let me move this out of the way.
Make sure that door doesn't fall off.
I know. So I do think, looking at this, if you remember going back to the design, when I was designing it, I said I thought that just this big field of grain would be a little too monotonous. So I think I was right, to have some kind of routed out design. And, initially what I did was 3 squares, sort of 1 inch squares, 1 inch squares located on the top of the door. I might still do that. I'll do circles that decrease in size and come down the center, something like that. But for those, what I would do is make a template and then just route it. Or because I have a Shaper Origin, I might just make an Illustrator file and then use my Shaper Origin to do it. I'm not sure yet. But, that's just a decorative thing. You don't feel like you would have to do it if you're making the cabinet exactly the same as I am. I don't know how many people are actually making the exact same cabinet I am. I know a few people are making cabinets. I just don't know if they're the same as mine. Anyways, so I'm going to put this out of the way. And as Joe mentioned, really hope that the door doesn't fall out. And then to prevent the door from falling out, I'm going to put some blue tape on it. Because as we all know, blue tape is really strong.
Super.
You might call it super tape. What was I going to do? Oh, glue up. Tape up and glue up. What's that?
With strips.
Yeah. Do you see wax paper? I think it's over on that table, that cabinet. No, it is not. Is it? Oh, I found it. All right. So you want to. This is how I do shopsawn veneer when I need to glue it up, multiple pieces. All right, that's about good there. I've clamped my rip fence down because I don't want glue on my saw.
Why not?
Well, we put some wax paper down. Okay, now we can set these back out. Can you see what I'm doing?
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah, they're just going directly against the rip fence. And I'm gonna. This stuff is kind of whiskery, so I'm just gonna make sure there's no whiskers down along the glue joint.
Just put them in your finger instead.
Yeah, I didn't say splinters. There is a nice breeze, isn't there? Got those a little bit out of order. When you do, like, I have found that sometimes it looks better to mix up the order of the pieces that you're using. And in fact, I was kind of forced to do that because as the piece that I chose to make these veneers from, as I was cutting it up, I came across some pieces that had like knots on them, and I don't want that showing on my door. So there's 5 pieces here that came from in the sequence that I didn't use. But you would never know that these are not like perfectly sequenced because they match. Because it's straight grain. Most of it's pretty tight grain. So it's hard.
So these are 1/8 of an inch or so?
Yeah, they're a little over 1/8 of an inch. What I'll do is, after the glue is dried, I did run the other veneer through my planer a little bit to clean up the bandsaw edge, get rid of the glue. Although there were no big glue clumps or anything. It was just a little bit of spread out glue here and there. But I was able to clean up both faces of the veneer and then choose which one I wanted to be on to show. All right. So tape. What I'm going to do is just put this down on the one closest to me, and then really push. Really push too hard. This is one of the issues of working with really thin stuff.
You flip that one.
Oh, I did. I don't want to do that. Alright, so I'm going to do it this way. Alright, I'm going to push it all together with one hand and then just lay the tape down. Alright, let's do one at the other end. See, it's starting to curl up a little bit. It's curling because I'm like stretching the tape as I lay it down to make sure that it's really pulling things tight. All right, so now I'm just going to run some tape. This tape is wide enough to cover 2 joints at once with these particular strips, so that's what I'm going to do. Call this the Snoop Dogg maneuver. I'm taking care of 2 joints at once. All right. You see it still opens up this way. That's really nice. All right. Now I need baby glue bot because it has the little baby nozzle, which evidently dried over today. Oops. I got it. Okay. So I'm going to spread glue on these joints. I'm not going to spread it. I'm just going to run a bead of glue down. So you have to remember, these are not really, they're not structural joints. What they are really for, in a way, is to keep the pieces together until you glue it down to the plywood. Once it's glued down to the plywood, it ain't moving. You know, it's not going to, joints should not open up at that point. The finished thickness of the veneers definitely should be less than 1/8 of an inch. So once I have my door, now technically I should have done my surface prep on the front of the door before I did the hinges, but so I'll have to keep it pretty minimal because that obviously will affect the whether or not the front of the door is flush with the liner. You know, if I take too much off of it when I'm hand planing or sanding, it will no longer be flush. So it's kind of, well, it's not kind of, it is, it's just the reverse, you know, the same process as before now. And as I do this, it'll actually flatten the veneer back out. Was there a question?
Yeah, Will wants to know, does standard glue work for gluing it to the plywood when you're veneering?
For a flat door or a flat panel like this, you can use just plain yellow glue with shopsawn veneer. If you're using commercially made, like really super thin veneer, you might want to use a glue design for veneering because it's possible that the yellow glue would bleed through, which just makes it a mess and is almost impossible to get rid of. For the other type of glue that works really well for veneering of this nature is polyurethane glue, so Gorilla Glue. And Gorilla Glue works well for bent laminations or curved panels too. All right, so I would just leave it like this now and let it dry for, like an hour and a half or something like that. And then I'll run it through my planer, bring it down to a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch, and then glue it to the back side of the door. All right. Are there any questions about this?
No weight needed.
What's that?
No weight needed.
No weight needed at all, because you're not gluing it down to anything, right? You're just sort of gluing those edges together. So, and once it goes, even if it was curved a little bit afterwards, when you clamp, when I put it in my vacuum press, it comes out, it'll be flat. My vacuum press, there's a platen in it that's flat, and then everything gets glued up on top of that platen, so everything is flat when it comes out. If you were doing this just with clamps and cauls, it would have the same effect, really.
Frank wants to know: do you use a slab when you plane it?
No. So when I send these through my DeWalt planer, I do not use a sled or anything at all. I just send these boards through. I will say that it's unusual that a lot of planers won't do that. They won't go thin enough, so you do have to put MDF underneath it to raise it up so you can get it thinner than 1/8 of an inch. I took a stop out of mine so that I could do that. Also, this stuff is all really straight grain, so even though it gets really thin, it doesn't tend to get torn up because the grain is so straight and well behaved. Any other questions?
That's it.
That's it.
Questions.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, what we're going to do next week is, in between now and then, I'm going to make the drawers. And next week, I will fit a drawer during class, but I will also show you how I start making a drawer, which is by fitting the drawer front to the opening. I will not show you how I make a drawer because it's just dovetails. And so we will skip that so that I can show you more. And I will also plan to show you the shiplapped back and also one of the pulls if possible. If for some reason we run out of time during class, or if in between now and next Monday, I just don't have enough time to physically literally do all of that, then Joe and I will make a little video of what's missing and post it. It won't be a live lesson, but there'll be a video of me doing whatever it is that gets left out of class. All right.
Nick says Phil Morley would be proud. And then Will, do you do all of your dovetails at 10 degrees? Do you have a blade? Do you have other blades for harder woods? I think the angled blade.
So someone mentioned that Philip Morley would be proud of what I've just done. Philip Morley would also be proud because I'm not ashamed of being bald. Whereas he is. I shouldn't say that. That's why he always has a hat on. Philip. And then what was the other question?
Do you do all your dovetails at 10 degrees?
Yes. All my dovetails are cut at 10 degrees.
Do you have other blades
for
harder woods?
No. One blade to rule them all.
Sharp blade.
A sharp one. Yeah, so I use the same dovetail blade for everything when I cut them at the table saw. Doesn't matter if it's hardwood or softwoods. The angle is the same. It works for all dovetails.
Peter wants to know, would you consider gluing the veneer on the door and then planing?
I would. So I have in the past, like if I was making the back of a cabinet this way, I would start with an oversized piece of plywood and glue the veneer down and then run it through the planer. The reason I would not do that here is because you would absolutely get snipe, and then you have to clean up that snipe anyways with a hand plane or with sanding. So the veneer is like 6 to 8 inches longer than the door. So I can run this through the planer and any snipe will be cut off. And most of when something this thin goes through the planer, where it tends to get eaten up is in the front, the first few inches or the last few inches. So I'll be able to cut that away too if it happens. Any other questions?
No.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Again, class next week is on Monday night at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. And that'll be our last live lesson.
John wants to know, do you ever use sacrificial piece of MDF when planing to compensate for snipe?
No, I do not send MDF through my planer. I have, though, sometimes what you can do instead of MDF is glue strips onto the two edges of whatever you're sending through that are longer than what you're planing. And then those are the pieces that get the snipe in them. And the stuff you're planing doesn't. That is a fairly common thing, but that would be like a solid wood. Maybe I don't understand what he's saying about using MDF in the planer, but I would not send MDF through my planer in such a way that the cutter heads are making contact with the MDF. We're good? All right, well, thanks for checking out tonight. Have a good rest of your week, and I will see y'all next week.